How's your pug, by the way?
He's good. He's sleeping right now. Oh, he opened his eyes.
Oh.
Let's just leave him there, because if it gets started, it won't end.
Okay, I gotcha.
I'll do it at the tail end. I'll bring him over.
Well, everybody, thank you for joining us today for Goñi Montes' talk. Goñi is a prolific illustrator working in sci-fi fantasy books, comics, editorial, and advertising. So born in Puerto Rico, he earned his BA from UPR. You may have to help me pronounce this, Goñi. Mayaguez? Mayaguez? Did I get it?
Perfect. Yes.
Perfect. And an MFA from SCAD in Atlanta. In 2003, he began working as a scientific illustrator for the Puerto Rico Sea Grant. He now mostly illustrates sci-fi fantasy books, comics, editorial, and advertising. I've already said that, I apologize. His clients include The New Yorker, DC Vertigo, Wizards of the Coast, The New York Times, Tor Publishing, Scientific American, and many, many more. So Goñi, it's a pleasure to have you here. We are very, very fortunate to grab you. I know you're very busy, so thanks so much for giving us your time. And everybody, if you wouldn't mind just putting your video on so Goñi can see everybody's faces, unless, of course, you have a bandwidth situation, which we understand if that's a situation. Great. Thank you so much. Goñi.
Nice to see you guys. Feels less lonely. Hi. So, I haven't actually used this application, so I need to find where it is that I can share my screen.
So at the very bottom, if you go to the very bottom, there you go. Present now.
Okay, let's see.
Is it not letting you present?
I have multiple. I have multiple screens. There we go. Yeah. Oh, this is pretty smart. This is easy. Okay, let's see what's showing on the screen. Is this even showing?
Yep, we see your dog. We see your studio.
Okay, perfect. It's funny because I tried to take a couple of pictures of the new studio. Let's click on view, slideshow, pause. It's funny because I tried to take a couple of pictures of the new studio. This is actually the last studio that I had that I really liked. Long story short, last year I moved 4 times last year.
Oh my gosh.
It's just a lot of like bad stuff happening on like a personal life sort of thing, and then moved from one house to another house to an apartment in a different country to back to this country to my sister's house to then now the place that I'm in right now. And then when they asked me if I wanted to sign a longer lease, I asked them, can it be for 10 years, please? So I don't have to ever move again, please. Like, I don't ever want to move again. But yeah, this is a studio that I had for about 6 years before all those moves happened. The new studio, I tried to take a new picture, but like, it just looks bad. So I'm like, screw it. I'll just put another this one. So anyway, guys, I'd like to do this a little on the informal side. So I'm not sure how it works over here, considering that we're like online. Is there like a sound or something if anybody has any questions? This is just for me to encourage like interruptions. If I don't consider them interruptions. It's perfectly fine for this to be a little bit more conversational. But anyway, usually when I start, that usually my studio. Nowadays, this is my studio, what I have right here. I usually start my talk talking about influences with a little bit of background. I started off as an artist pretty late, actually. I'm always going to live a little bit envious of those folks that pretty much say that they started painting and drawing when they were children, when they were young. I actually didn't start that way. All my life, I was actually good at other stuff, mainly like math, science, stuff like that. And it was actually sort of expected that I was going to seek a career in that. And when I went to college, that's actually what I went for. I got a degree in like industrial biotech stuff. It's just it sounds really exciting when you're in high school and you're like, whoa, that's going to be awesome. And then you finally get there and the classes are really boring and the whole field is very, at least to me, it was very boring. And I'm like, this is just because it's cool. Once we get into the job stuff, that's when it's going to get exciting. Nope. It got even more boring for me. I have friends from that time that love what they do and it's super exciting. And the topics and the things that they research is really exciting. So I love to read what they do. I don't want to do it myself. So long story short, I had like this meltdown when I was looking for internships and jobs, that it's like, this is actually what started is that one of my friends in one of our last semesters, she said a comment that she's like, I just want everybody to leave me alone doing my research in my lab and I will die a happy woman. And I remember thinking, crap, I don't want to do that. I really don't want to do that, but that's actually what I'm in line for. That's what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. So I had to start finding something else to do. And I had actually taken a couple of art classes completely just out of like, that looks like fun. I'll try it out as electives. But then I had sort of really started loving doing that. And it was one of those cases where like I wasn't before ever a morning person, but those art classes were at 7 in the morning. And I remember on days that I had that art class, I would just wake up like super excited at 6 in the morning to go for an art class, which is unprecedented, like getting me up at around that time. Nowadays, it's commonplace. I woke up today at 7, perfectly fine. But at that age, I was just not a morning person. So then at that time, I considered I wanted to change departments. And I thought, well, I mean, I already got all these credits in like biotech and all that stuff and chemistry and whatnot. So maybe if I work within like pharmaceuticals or something, it'll be better than biotech and it'll be less lonely or something. By the way, when I was actually looking for internships, these labs were actually like individual labs where essentially you work. It's not a lab full of people. It's a cubicle turned into a lab. So you're just not in contact with anybody. You're just working in a cubicle in a lab. So that's why I was like, I don't want to work alone. I want to work with people. So, and then I chose illustration. I see the irony there. Anyway, when I went to actually switch to pharmaceuticals, I kind of did something on the whim, which is very unlike me, and I erased the department that I wanted to switch to and like what I wanted to do, and I wrote art, and thinking that like I don't know. I was a kid. I wasn't even a kid. I was actually 19 or 20, so that's not even kid age. But it was definitely an impulse, and they accepted me, and I was like, well, there's nothing I can do now. I'm gonna have to go do art. So I did. I kept it a secret for about a year. I didn't tell anybody in my family for about a year. And then when I got my first job, because of my background in science and now the art degree, it was on scientific illustration. And then I remember when my dad asked me like, wait, how did you get that job? Like, I thought you went for science. It's like, well, I did the art thing. It's like, what art thing? It's like, yeah, I have a degree in art. And he's like, what? Because the other thing is that during that time I was already on my own. Before actually doing scientific illustration, my first few jobs were as an IT. So I was essentially just sustaining myself, and I had my own place, my own car, and everything. I was completely independent. So it's not like my parents were completely in contact with me about the whole situation. But anyway, they were kind of surprised that I was like, yeah, I'm not doing the science or math thing. I'm mainly drawing for the most part. And shortly after that, I just started kind of soaking up all the like art stuff. And it was fascinating, and to this day, it's still very fascinating. I think I have because of it, I have a bit of an unjaded view of it, where like, I have so many friends that have the discussion of like, is this art? Is this good art? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't care. Yes, it is. It all is. I don't care. I love it all. Just give me it. And actually, it's funny because I was literally just having an argument with somebody on Facebook like this morning, with Yuko Shimizu of all people. I should not stop it. I should not do that. Starting shit with Yuko. But anyway,
That's bold.
well, she posted a thing of like, this is not good, and I'm like, yeah, but they finished it and they posted it online. What's the big deal? I told her like, it's not good, but it's not bad either. And also like, dude, kudos for you for having the gall to actually finish something and post it. Fuck it, post it. Who cares? You're gonna get better or you're gonna get worse. Either way, it's gonna be interesting.
Right.
Heck yeah.
So, awesome. So anyway, but when I started soaking up all of that, I kind of wanted to start deviating away from the scientific aspect and actually start doing more art. And that's when I started experimenting with different mediums and stuff. Like I sculpted a little bit. I did a lot of like digital stuff. I did the whole like digital like modeling for like a video game company for like just a little bit. I think it was like 6 months or something. Those projects don't last very long. And like the turnaround is really fast. So that stuff was really fun. And then when I went to SCAD, Atlanta, I actually my first choice was like, oh, I'm gonna do graphic design, mainly because I'm a Spanish speaker by nature, and graphic design in Spanish translates different to English. So I thought I was gonna be drawing a lot more because graphic design in Spanish, the way that it's treated, like diseño gráfico, it's more illustrative, whereas graphic design in English is less illustrative, more design. Absolutely beautiful, but it is not my forte. And I'm a sucker for good graphic design. Actually, I'm a sucker for mediocre graphic design too. I don't know. I love it all. But anyway, it's something that when I went to class, all of my colleagues they grasped it. They understood it. And I'm like over here just doing little drawings, and I'm like, I don't want to do what you're doing. I don't want to do that. I want to do something else. And that's when I started talking to other professors, and professors like, oh, it seems like what you want to do is illustration. And that's when like I switched majors. I literally was just there for 1 quarter in graphic design, and then I switched majors to illustration. I ended up getting a minor in graphic design because I already had the credits. And I still can do some of it, but like my thing is drawing. I just like to draw. And by the way, like, I know it's difficult. I knew my parents, bless their boomer Puerto Rican hearts. They were all about everything has to be math, everything has to be science, and that's actually a very common thing from the boomer generation in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, generally speaking, that was literally the only way to get like a proper job. My dad himself was an engineer. My mom was like an actual school teacher. So like, and that's what she taught. So essentially like they were not being like, you shouldn't do art, blah, blah, blah. No, they were genuinely like scared that it's like, but are you going to be able to sustain yourself? But anyway, the whole reason why I say this is because I still chose to do it. And the times that I've taught, I used to teach at SCAD. I'm not at the moment. COVID, thank you very much. So I always tell my students that it's like, listen, like, this is not medicine. You can't do it so wrong that you're going to kill people. Like, you don't need a degree to call yourself an artist. You're an artist. And 1, and 2, like, everyone has told you that this is going to be uphill, this is going to be difficult, blah, blah, blah. But you still do it. You still love it. And for that, I respect you. So I will treat you with the respect that I treat every other artist that I have met, whether they are an established name or not. Also, what the hell is an established name anyway? Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and start talking more about like the work because I have a lot of stuff to do. I usually start with the influences. I grew up in Puerto Rico. So most of my influences, my first influences came from there. I started seeing a lot of, from a very young age, I started seeing a lot of like printmaking, Puerto Rican printmaking masters. You're going to see that the color palette that they have is a huge influence to this day. They love to mix a lot of tertiary tones with like 1 or 2 bold primaries. Like very rarely you'll see like secondary tones, which is weird because I love purple, but still it's very strange to see that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, it's like super high color, super high contrast. And it's still to this day a very, very strong influence. This stuff is from an artist named Lorenzo Omar. He's debatably my favorite of all those Puerto Rican printmakers. A lot of the stuff is, yes.
We're still on the picture of your studio.
Oh, what is happening here? Oh, that's unusual. Okay, I'm gonna stop presenting and then start again and see what happens.
Sounds good, thanks.
Okay.
And this is like every class for every instructor. Wait, why is this working? What's going on?
I am terribly sorry. Okay.
No, so everybody here is pretty used to it. So it's quite
your entire screen. Oh, okay, I think this is actually gonna work better now.
Okay. Thank you.
Because I chose to share the screen instead of the window itself. So hopefully this actually works.
We're seeing everything now.
All right.
Excellent. Thank you.
Can you see me flip? Yeah, it's flipping.
Yep.
All right. So this is all like artwork from Puerto Rican printmakers, which is like generally my first big influence. You'll see like the color, the high contrast, that stuff that I love. It's highly political, as is the existence of every Puerto Rican, whether we like it or not. We actually grew up in a colony, so it's difficult not to be political. But like all of the matter is like something that just draws you in from a very young age. And I love the colors. I love the usage of like those tertiaries. Even when they do black and white, it's still very high contrast. And of course, black and white is something, they're printmakers. So there's going to be a lot of lino cut, a lot of wood cut. I think the vast majority in Puerto Rico is going to be wood cut and serigrafía, silk screening. Whereas like if you look at more Cuban printmakers, you're going to find that they use a lot more other mediums as well, even though like we're all Caribbean, so the influences are very similar. Interesting graphic design choices. By the way, this is from like early 1900s to mid 1900s Puerto Rico. So there's a lot of stuff that I still look at this at the work and I'm like so freaking ahead of their time. Because like the stuff that they were doing to this day holds up to like, this is what we're doing today. Like this is awesome. I mean, look at this thing. This is gorgeous. Some of my other influences, and now I'm gonna start getting lowbrow. Not really. Anime. And I actually say this because when I actually went to art school, this was a while ago, there was sort of like a stigma of liking anime and manga, and letting it influence you, which is something that like I'm so happy nowadays to see that people are much more open to stuff like that, because it's become a lot more universal, and also a lot of it has influenced animation within the United States as well, and within other countries as well. So you can see more influences sort of getting imparted, because there's a lot of good stuff coming there. Yeah, more anime. And then I started reading comics. I should definitely choose a different comic to post there. I started reading comics when I started creating art, so around 19 or 20. And this is one of the artists that actually got to me really fast. That was Joshua Middleton. So I have to admit there's some influences of like very contemporary artists that still sort of like show up. It's funny though, because as I've gotten more and more into my career, there's a list of artists whose work I would love to consume and enjoy, but I don't, so not to let them influence me. And I'm perfectly proud to say who they are, because it's stuff like James Jean, Tomer Hanukkah, Joshua Middleton, Yuko sometimes herself. I try to avoid some of the work. It's people that work with like very vibrant colors and very flat colors that it's like, if I start looking at their works too much, I see how they solve problems, and then I end up like one of two things: subconsciously solving a problem the same way, which means I'm not solving it, I'm just copying it, or B, focusing so much on not solving the problem the same way that I cannot see any other choices. So to avoid that, I just like once or twice a year when I have no projects coming in, I'm like, I'm going to binge all of their work. And then I put it down. And then for a whole 1 or 2 years, I don't look at their work. This is more comic stuff. I love this one. It got really grim around like, I think they did like 120 something issues, if not 140 something issues. But around like issue 15 or so, it started getting really morbid and I can't deal with it. So I kept collecting it just out of respect for it. But it was like, nah, I'm done with it. So I'm going to show some of my first few things that I started doing when I was in Sea Grant. This is my first job as a scientific illustrator. It's going to be a cringe-a-thon. Like, whenever I look at these things, I'm just like trying not to, but I have to. And also, is anybody here acquainted with the webcomic Penny Arcade? Yeah? Okay, so Penny Arcade, something that I highly admire of them, especially like the artists, is that you can still to this day go and see their very, very first comic that they did maybe 2 decades ago. And the artist himself, he says that it's like, yeah, I don't like it. I see how amateur it was or something. But he sees it as like, that's where I started. That's when it all started. And now he's just an absolute master of sequential art. And it's really cool to see how that person started and their lack of fear of like, well, I'm going to do it and I'm going to share it and I'm going to post it. And yeah, I'm going to get people yelling at me and telling me that I'm not good. But I satisfied that need to communicate this visually, which is by far probably the most important thing that we do as artists. Without further ado, this is my first few like actual work that I got paid for. Oh God. This is probably not the cringiest one of them. I used to do a lot of posters for them. The reason why I was actually hired is not just to do scientific illustration. They did a lot of like educational events and educational publications. So it was sort of like, it was straddling a job between like properly drawing precise organisms and doing like the outreach like stuff, like the educational publications and the events and whatnot. So some of them are like posters and stuff like that. They were very fond of odd-sized posters. This is actually a poster, and they wanted it this size. And I'm like, all right, cool. That sounds interesting. It looked really cool when it was printed because it was actually quite large, and it was like all panoramic, and it looked pretty neat. This is actually scientific illustration. It was more mechanical than anything. Oh, God. Educational stuff. It's whatever.
Yeah, but it has a manager. That's awesome.
Yeah. Oh God. I don't even know what to say here. It's work. Oh, this was really cool. So one of the perks of working for Sea Grant is that whenever I needed to take reference pictures of anything, that they wanted everything to be very, very precise and very like adhere to the reality of whatever it is that they were like doing any kind of event or education for. So whenever it was a matter of like, this one was all dealing with fisheries. So they literally just gave me a camera and like sent me to the fishery community, like the fishing communities, with our in-house anthropologist. And like I would just be there and like take pictures, and I would go on the boats with them and stuff like that. And it was really interesting. The same thing happened whenever, oh my God, this was really silly. There was a person that was a specialist on like coral reef organisms. So whenever I needed reference shots or any kind of references, I would actually go to all of these people. But he in particular was known for not having a very large amount of reference shots. So whenever I needed anything from reefs, that means I would have to go to him, and he like, oh, I don't have any. So just grab the camera and the scuba gear and then the snorkeling gear and drive to the beach and just go take pictures. And I'm like, I'm gonna go take pictures at a reef for work. Yeah, this job is awesome. That was one of the perks, and it was really cool. Okay, so That's pretty much like the last few projects that I did. I did a whole bunch of projects, but honestly, not a lot of them have survived. I know it's in their stuff, but I didn't keep a lot myself. The other thing is that I was like, this is stuff that I did in-house, so like none of it is mine. It's not copyrighted by me or anything like that. This is work that I did for them. So after that, I just started getting a little bit more, I wanted to go further out of the science stuff and more into like art. So I started experimenting, and that's actually when I went to SCAD. And when I switched majors from graphic design to illustration, I started experimenting with a lot of stuff, because since I started drawing and painting really late in life, I had a lot of like gaps, and I did not have a lot of knowledge, and I did not have a lot of skills. And I certainly didn't have any experiences, or like most of the experience that you get on the undergrad. Here's the thing. I didn't go, University of Puerto Rico in Mayaguez is not an art school. It's actually an engineering school. And I was in biotech. So when I switched to art, I still stayed in that same place, but the art department was very, very limited. So I didn't get to actually experience a lot of like different mediums and learn from them. So when I was taking my master's degree, I actually took the time to start experimenting a lot with a bunch of different stuff. So what you're going to see here is going to look very different to what my work looks like today, but it's still part of it, because it's just sort of like, it's teaching you how to like find different methodologies of visual problem solving, as well as experimenting with different media. So yeah, this me attempting, this is just has not aged well. This is actually a classmate of mine. She was kooky as hell, as you can see from the picture. My attempt at doing children's books. I did it because it was an assignment, but like I did not enjoy children's books in general. I don't think like a children's book artist. And the people that do usually have the sharpest, most interesting senses of humor, and I just don't have that skill. So I don't know. The thing with children's book artists is that their sense of humor is very well developed, and it's sort of like ageless. Like a child would find it funny, but so will an adult. I actually always recommend Mike Lowry for that. He's actually a really good children's book artist. Okay, let's stop with that. Oh, this project was interesting. I'm gonna try to zoom into this. So I had a lot of gaps when it came to drawing as well. So we had to do this class. I wonder if I can zoom into this. Oh, it won't let me. Okay, so I never really got down to painting it, but we had a drawing class, and it was just drawing. This class was all about like we were not allowed to use any other medium other than just dry media for drawing purposes. No painting, nothing wet or anything like that. And then among many projects, we had to also design one project that we were going to be carrying throughout the whole quarter. And then what I proposed to my professor, I proposed a couple of different projects, but she liked this one, which was I wanted to draw stream of consciousness. And the reason why I wanted to do it is because because of my lack of education from before, I had found a few things that I could do well, and then I stuck to those, and then I wouldn't do anything else. And essentially what I wanted to do was just a long stream of like drawings that were like the very first thing randomly that popped to my mind, I had to draw it. Like that's the only rule. And I cannot find anything else. I cannot say, oh, that's too difficult, I'm going to draw something else. No, it's the very first thing. So it started off really easy because a lot of the stuff that was coming to my mind was stuff that I was already used to. But then eventually, like, where is it? Here we go. The horse. That was the breaking point. That was the moment where I was like, I'm about to just change my mind and draw something else. Because drawing horses is incredibly difficult. And I don't think I succeeded very well in it, but at least it reads as a horse to a certain extent. Or a Pokemon or whatever. Anyway, she really liked the project. It took, I want to say 4 weeks, because it was like every day I would just draw, add more stuff, and add more stuff. The other thing that it actually taught me is that you can sit down and start something and not finish it and just like stagger work and come back to it later, which is something that's very necessary for commercial illustration. It's a very necessary skill. This is ugly. This is when I started doing more digital work. When I started like taking the digital illustration classes, and I kind of like this is sort of like when I started developing my knack for like computer illustration. I still like to use some analog media, some traditional media. Is that what people call it? I don't know. I call it analog. Because I know there's a lot of beautiful brushes, and I love what people are doing with it. But I spend a lot of time in front of the screen. And then one of my hobbies is actually gaming, so that's yet another screen. So whenever there's a moment where it's like, well, I want this to look more watercolory, it's a chance to step away from the screen and just actually break out the watercolors and stuff like that. Is it the right thing to do? No, there is, like I said, there's no way that you can do it where you're just gonna do it so wrong you kill people. No. This is a situation where like you are your own audience. You don't have to love your work, but you have to like what you do. Like you don't have to love the product, but you have to love the process. So those are moments where I'm like, oh, I'm tired of painting in the screen. I'm just gonna break out some watercolors and have some fun with it. I'm actually it's not in this presentation, but at the very end, I'm gonna show you a piece that I worked on. It's gotta be a secret between us because it's still under NDA. But it's one that I like because of the whole COVID thing and being here, I'm like tired of looking at the screen, and I literally just broke out some markers and I ended up doing a sketch and a drawing that I finished in the computer, but the skeleton like sketch of it was just like this right here. Like, and like I actually used both ends, like the Sharpie end and the less sharp end.
So Goñi, when you do present that, just give me a heads up and I'll stop recording because
I will let you know.
Right.
Oh God, I already announced it. I hope the art director doesn't. Oh, she's gonna be fine. She's cool. She's a cool person. I always have this piece over here because this is like the first piece of mine that actually got into Society of Illustrators. This was on the student show, not on the professional show. But this was like a life-changing experience for me. And it's not because it got into Society of Illustrators, it's what happened after that. So this piece got into Society of Illustrators. At the time, I was incredibly shy. I'm very open about this information about me now. I wasn't at the time. I wasn't until very recently, as a matter of fact. I'm actually in the spectrum. So I get very highly overwhelmed by like ambiance noise and stuff like that. I have a bunch of like autism symptoms that kind of flare up. I have gone through for many, many years, like most of my life, I've been through therapy and I've been through like a lot of people that have helped me with it. So I am aware that I pass as a neurotypical person, but I am not. I still have to, from time to time, deal with like a lot of the symptoms. One of them is I get a very specific sense of social anxiety. I'm actually sort of an ambivert. I love being around people. And Christina knows this because like we've met at conventions and I love being in conventions. I love being around people. But I get a sensory overload at some point. Too much noise, too many visuals. Beautiful art is beautiful, but it's so much of it. And like my brain, I think in image. I don't think in verb. I don't think in language. So to speak, I have to sort of exercise first my language before I actually was doing this before the talk. Like I actually have to talk for a while to sort of like boot it up. Normally, like when I went to Society of Illustrators, I was still at that point where like I hadn't realized that I needed to do something about it. My thought was like, I'm just gonna paint and draw on my own and people are gonna take notice and that's that. And that's not true. And that's not gonna happen that way. At the time, that realization upset me a little bit because that meant I had to change aspect of myself, and not change, but grow. I had to like, accumulate better social skills, learn how to talk to people, learn coping mechanisms to deal with my symptoms, which this is golden right here, this noise cancellation headphones. I always have them with me when I go on conventions and stuff like that. They look like headphones. People think I'm listening to music. I'm not. I love the fact that conventions are actually getting more and more inclusive of different kinds of people. The last convention that I went to had a silent room. And people were allowed to be there so long as either they were whispering or not talking at all. So yeah, I used that room like crazy. Like I was in it twice, 3 times a day. And it felt like a gift. It's like, this is awesome, because even though there were people there, everyone was quiet or in their phone. It was just like no sensory overload. The room was very quiet. It was really cool. So going to the site of illustrators is an experience, to say the least. I'm pretty sure some of you have gone. It's actually it's not small, but it gets very, very, very packed. We're talking shoulder to shoulder, and there's no resting place. So when I was there, like, the only way that I handled it at the time, and I'm not proud of this, was to get completely trashed. I was completely crunked. I drank a lot so that it would give me tunnel vision, and it would sort of like close in, and I wouldn't be as like assaulted by all this sensory overload. But that is not sustainable. So that's when I actually started working on like how to time myself, how to explore my feelings and understand what I'm feeling and how to manage it and deal with it. And also how to talk to people in a better way. And this is actually, for a moment, there was a moment of discomfort of like, oh, I'm going to have to change. Little did I know that I didn't have to change. All I had to do was grow and get to know my colleagues in the illustration industry. And now it's the complete opposite. I go to these events and I cannot wait to talk to my friends because we have so much in common. And then I thought it's like, well, I'm just a weird guy. And it turns out I'm not. And I'm just one of many different people, and everyone's different and unique in their own way. And it's really awesome. And it's really cool to see different perspectives and talk to people that are doing entirely different projects. And it's just so exciting to see everybody. Sensory overload? Sure, go outside for a while. Especially Society of Illustrators does the events, the ones that I go to during the winter. So it's freezing outside, so nobody goes outside. So that's a perfect place for silence. I freeze my ass off, but my sensory overload calms down. I used to, my experience was that I would actually go to the bathroom. Doesn't work anymore. They even actually group up and start talking in the bathroom. That's how packed it gets inside of Illustrator, so don't even bother. But going outside does work. Anyway, this is actually when I started making a lot of contact with art directors. And I got my first big job, not because somebody saw my work and said, this work is good enough, let's go ahead and hire them. I actually got my first big job because Irene Gallo saw this work. I'm flipping through it really fast right now just to show you some of it, but I'll let it play now. Whatever, I'll just flip through it here. So Irene Gallo saw some of that work because at the time I was interning. Check out this like degrees of separation. I was an intern. Was that an intern? It was more like an assistant's job. I was an assistant to illustrator Bill Meyer, who's very good friends with Greg Montes, who is with Irene Gallo. And then at some point in a conversation with Bill Meyer, I think Greg and Mark Broad, who are very good friends as well, came to Atlanta and stuff like that. And Bill told me, oh, we're going to go for a beer later after work. Do you want to come? And I remember saying, like, it's like, why would I want to go? Like, no. But then I had already gone to the site of illustrators once before, and I had already seen that people were interacting and stuff like that. So I'm like, okay, let's try it out. So I go there, and the first thing that happens is that these renowned illustrators just treat me like one of them. Like, oh, you're just another illustrator. Let's have fun. Let's talk about stuff and whatever. Which felt like, okay, no, there's a discrepancy here. You guys are renowned. I'm just like some kid. But no, they treated me with like a certain level of respect, and like the camaraderie and the friendship was awesome. And they're like, oh, do you have a card? And I'm like, sure, yeah, here's a card. And they said like, oh, I bet Irene's gonna like this. I'm gonna show it to her. And I'm like, I had known of Irene Gallo because Bill Meyer and Irene had worked together on other things. But yeah, they said like, oh, I bet Irene's gonna like it. I'm gonna show it to her. So Greg shows it to Irene Gallo, and Irene Gallo liked it. And at the time, she had a blog, and she which I think is still alive, but she's not using it anymore. And she posted some of my work, and that was really nice. Like, I felt really good about that, and it was really cool. So that, in conjunction with this piece getting into the side of illustrators, the stuff that Irene Gallo showed was pretty much this, this stuff. So that frog piece gets into the side of illustrators, and then I go there, and then while I'm there, I see that Irene Gallo is at the event, and I'm like, oh, I should go and thank her. So I go to her, and it's like, oh, hey, Irene, I'm Goñi Montes. And she once I told her my name, she's like, oh, that's really cool. And then by coincidence, my piece, which I had still not noticed, was somewhere like behind me. And she's like, look, there's your piece. And I'm like, oh, crap, that's awesome. So we talked for like, I want to say a minute, less than that. She's like, oh, are you in New York? And I'm like, no, I live in Atlanta, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, that's really cool. I love your work. It's really cool. It's like, well, I wanted to thank you for posting it, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, it's really nice to see like new work and stuff like that. It looks like you're pretty established, right? And I'm like, no, actually, I'm not. I'm completely starting up. Like, actually, I'm here to drum up work if possible. Here's my card. So I gave her my card. Maybe we talked for a few more seconds. She was surrounded by a lot of people that also wanted to talk to her. So I just essentially said like, okay, I'm gonna let you be because like everyone's in line and I want to talk to you. So I'll let you be. And I walk away and I feel this like anxiety of like, how dare I talk to her? This is like really messed up. And like, how dare I be so chummy and give her my card? Blah, blah, blah. It was just like a complete like assault of anxiety. But then 5 days later, she sends me an email and she's like, yo, you're right. Let's do something together. Here's a project. And that's kind of like the reinforcement that I needed to understand that it's like, I need to just chill and get some people skills and start talking to people and whatnot. And yeah, it's been rocky ever since then. Like I've been sort of developing them. There were drunken nights. At some point I had a reputation that I didn't care for because I was that guy that get drunk and loud. But it's just because I didn't know how to deal with any of that. But eventually, like enough therapy and enough help actually helped me. And that gave me the first big project. And after that, well, essentially I just got really lucky because my first big project was Irene Gallo, which puts me in the map pretty intensely. And after that, it just, the project started flowing. I have to admit though, like it took me about 5 years to completely sustain myself off of freelance. Nowadays, all of my work is freelance. All of my income is freelance. I have taught at SCAD Atlanta from time to time. It's something that I do. I confess that, yes, the income on the side is great. It's nice. But it's something that I do because the more I stay inside the studio, the more I work by myself, the more I revert into being like a complete hermit and not talking to people. So, and that also brings a lot of anxieties and problems. So if I stay like constantly talking to people, or at least once, a couple of times a week, it keeps me healthier and it keeps me more balanced. So I do miss it. I'm currently not teaching, but like I'm looking forward to actually starting it again because I'm becoming a hermit again, and I don't like that. So anyway, all of those last pieces that are there, that's still student work. During that time, I actually did that project with Irene Gallo, which apparently is not in my presentation, which is kind of crappy. So I'm gonna go ahead and look it up because it's really funny.
Goñi,
Yeah.
Will you look it up? Give everybody a quick overview of who Irene is, what publisher she's with, and so forth.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Irene Gallo is a renowned art director. She works for Tor Publishing, Tor.com, and Tor Books. She's one of the head honchos there. And she's essentially like become one of like the fairy godmothers of illustration. Like once you get a blessing from her, other clients can actually know that they can trust you. There's several art directors out there that love to welcome new illustrators. It's not just Irene Gallo, but Irene Gallo is one of the art directors that welcome new illustrators within the realms of sci-fi and fantasy. At the time, I was sort of like tilting more towards, or I thought I wanted to do more editorial. And I love doing editorial, don't take me wrong, I love it. But working with Irene Gallo opened the doors for more sci-fi fantasy as well, which is actually going to be, I'm going to talk about more in the, later in the presentation, because that's actually my bread and butter now. But when I started, it was mainly editorial with a few sci-fi fantasy stuff from Irene Gallo and Tor.com. the cool thing about the sci-fi fantasy industry is that it's not that other markets are not as welcoming to to people of all kinds of like walks of life, but sci-fi fantasy and illustration, sci-fi fantasy and has a tendency to be even more inclusive, like even more like that, to be even more welcoming, which is really, really cool. A good example that I'll say is that like I am a person of color. I am a Puerto Rican. I am a queer man. So like when I actually, this is kind of whatever. This is something that happened factually. So when I came out, and by came out I mean I posted a picture of me and my then boyfriend. It was sort of like I was in a convention with him, and then I posted a picture of something that we were doing in that convention, and then Twitter at that point, I was still in Twitter at that time. I'm not anymore. Found out that I'm queer. And I lost a great deal of followers all of a sudden, like overnight. And I was like, at this time, it was really funny because I remember thinking that it's like, nah, that doesn't happen. People don't do that anymore. But then it happened, and I was like, oh, this is not shit. This is like for real. But creatives, art directors, and writers took notice of this, and Irene Gallo was one of them. And I remember Irene's like, oh, since you're celebrating of this, let's be a little bit more inclusive. And like, here's a couple of stories with more people like of color, Puerto Rican people, queer people, and stuff like that. And like all of the sci-fi fantasy stuff that I work on right now is stuff that I can represent, that feels like represents me, which is awesome because it's like, I know that I do commercial work. I know that my work is not the most personal out there, but there's like, when Irene Gallo contacts me, there is a big fistful of like of personal like energy that I can pour into that work because she contacts me with projects that I completely relate with because it's like, yep, that's my representation right there. Like, and I can show you eventually. It's in the presentation. I'm gonna look for that first project that she gave me. Oh my god. Let's see if I can find it. Stored, maybe? Stored. It was 2008 or 2009.
Your files are organized. I'm so jealous.
Oh, it's a mess right now. I wish it's a mess right now. Okay. Where's my Tor? Maybe this one. Yeah. So this was my first project with Irene Gallo, which is my first big project. I don't know. It was really cute. It was like literally just drawing a cat that was traversing through Japan, and like that was the short story. And there were like some like small illustrations as well that are supposed to be very small. Like they were supposed to be like that. But anyway, the big illustration was this one, like this large one, and it was really fun. I had to learn a little bit of Japanese to make sure that was written right. That is actually the title of the story in Japanese. But because Irene herself was like, we got to make sure that's written right because we've had some issues before. And I'm like, no, don't worry. We'll figure this out perfectly. But anyway, that was my first big commercial project. And from then on, I started getting a lot of editorial work. And I found that it was a great sort of entryway to illustration because there's a lot of editorial publications and a lot of them need artwork. A lot of it is illustration. And when it comes to like editorial projects, I now have been in the industry long enough to know that there's like waves. So when I broke into the editorial industry with illustration, the wave was mainly to depend mostly on photography. Whereas like now we're going through a wave where like they love illustration. So I'm getting a lot more editorial work, and like that actually opens the doors to a lot of us illustrators to like sort of break into the industry. Some of them don't pay as much, and the first thing that I'm gonna say is value yourself and your work. I'm gonna be that guy that says like, if somebody tells you like I'm gonna pay you with exposure and stuff like that, I'm sorry, but that's wrong. You are the illustrator, you are the communicator, you are the visual problem solver. It is your job to figure out exposure. It's not theirs. So in other words, like if you don't teach people to value your work, and by that I mean in a monetizable way, then people are not going to learn it. So unfortunately, I've learned through hardships myself that it's up to us to tell them that it's like, sorry, but I don't have, I need to pay my bills. Editorial, though, was actually very lucrative at first. When I started as a freelance illustrator, it started first sort of like I would get a project, and then maybe for 2 months I didn't get a project, and then get another one. Then that gap between those projects started getting like smaller and smaller until they started overlapping. Until nowadays, it's usually I have like 3 or 4 projects running at the same time, which it's stuck to the wall. But over here, there's like a whiteboard with like a bunch of tasks that I have to do on a daily basis. When you're a freelancer, you have to be incredibly organized and do whatever means. Like I have a whiteboard where I can write this stuff because I tried to do the digital agenda and it does not work for me. Like things fall through the cracks. I need to actually get up and write the things on the whiteboard. Otherwise, it just falls through the cracks. So whatever means you can actually like, you notice at work to keep you organized, please do employ them. So I started doing a lot of editorial work. These are just pretty much magazines. It's all magazine stuff. And during these projects, I try to incorporate a little bit of like that quirkiness of like sci-fi fantasy and whatnot, because it's just what keeps it entertaining for me. And it's also the way that I like to like solve visual problems and stuff like that. Oh, this is an interesting story. I had to redo that illustration a long time ago. Screw it. Let's go. I'm not going to say the client because I'm being recorded, but I'm still going to tell you the story. So they are a very wholesome magazine, and they wanted to make sure that the illustration looked wholesome. So this is the illustration that I finished for them. And then they requested that she look more matronly. And I didn't understand. So I'm like, does she need to look older, perhaps? So I did some changes to this particular illustration, and they're like, oh, no, she looks old now. We mean more like matronly. And I'm like, I don't understand. Long story short, they wanted her to have larger breasts. And they just didn't want to say it out loud. So I made sure I embarrassed them. So I sent them several different choices, all of which looked ridiculous. And then the client like sent a note to my then agent telling them, you can tell your artist that choice number B or choice B will work. And I'm like, oh, so now you're like just holier than thou. Screw you. You're the one that's asking for bigger breasts. That's ridiculous. Like, also, you're supposedly a wholesome magazine. Like, who cares about breast size in this fucking illustration? Does it even matter?
Gosh.
It was just so ridiculous. But also, like, trying to avoid it. Like, she needs to look more matronly. Like, what does that even mean? It's like, listen, I'm a Spanish speaker, but I'm pretty sure you're using that word wrong. This was for Dwell magazine. It's really cool. This is also a really good opportunity. There's not a lot of people out there that do crowd scenes. Crowd scenes, generally speaking, especially crowd scenes where people are interacting with the setting or with each other. It can be very niche. It's a lot of work. But a lot of art directors look out for that because there is like a gap to fill there. So if that's something that you naturally like to do, that's a skill that you can actually employ and use a lot to, get more work and stuff like that. I don't do a lot of crowd scenes. I actually tend to sort of stay away from them unless there's a good budget for it because it is very time consuming. Especially this illustration, it took me a while because there's some people interacting with the background and stuff like that, and like figuring all that stuff out and balancing all out, it can be a little tricky. Yeah, more crowd scenes. Or I don't even know if this is a crowd scene. This was for Scientific American. Mark Mrak is a wonderful art director. He loves it's really interesting because there are publications out there that I thought that I would never get to work with because they're so big and I felt like they were so unreachable. But and they're so famous. But it turns out that some of the art directors that work there, if not all of them, are very they're looking for new people and they want to give them opportunities. Scientific American and Rolling Stone are some of those two publications that I thought like, oh, I'm never gonna get to work with them until I have like a huge name and I'm super famous. Nope, flat out, they like out of nowhere, it's like, oh, I love your work, let's work together. And especially Mark Marak in Scientific American, he's very precise. Like emails are really comfortable, like it's very easy to work with. And then anyone from Rolling Stone, they're just as cool as you can imagine they can be. Like when you're working with them, it's like, whoa, this is rad, man. Yeah, let's make it weirder. Yeah. And I love working with them for that. They only call me for like stuff that's really trippy and like looks like an acid trip, which has gotten me into trouble. Because then people think that I use stuff and I'm like, nope, I cannot. Again, autism. I cannot use anything. Coffee can mess me up. Oh, this is more Scientific American stuff. Oh, this kind of sucked because like the 49ers were up for the Super Bowl that year and then they lost. So I'm like, come on, man. This was me trying to incorporate some humor. Usually when I try to incorporate humor into illustrations is because the writer was more humorous than me and I caught a glimpse of their humor and then I just translated it into a visual more than anything because I don't have a very good sense of humor. This is hilarious. This was for Skiing Magazine and the article was about this thing they called the gondola, which is a gondola where everybody smokes weed in. And I'm like, okay, can we just do like little smoke wings out of the gondola then? I was like, yeah, let's do that. An article about cheating. I don't even remember. A lot of this stuff happened a long time ago. More Skiing Magazine. They're actually really fun to work with. Oh, this is very interesting. European magazines tend to have like, European magazines are strange because they're more about the topic. They're not afraid to get dark. They're not afraid to get weird. And they're not afraid if the craft suffers for it, so long as the concept is strengthened by that action. So I've worked with a few of them, but it gets weird sometimes because they keep getting darker and darker, and I'm like, I usually cannot get more darker than that. So this was an article about Hezbollah. I don't remember what this was. Sorry. Oh, this is a really fun story. So I think this was for, was it New York Times? I think it may have been the Times, yeah. So when I did this, I actually asked the art director, like, hey, like, I know Nintendo can be a little bit weird about their copyrights, but never more than Disney. And this alligator over here belongs to Disney. So I'm a little afraid. Can we actually use this? And they were like, no, it's all within the fair use. It's perfectly fine. So I finished the illustration and I'm like, you said it's fine. Okay, it's fine. So I finished the illustration and a few weeks later, I get an email. And you know how emails only show you the subject and like maybe the first sentence. And it was like such and such person at Disney. And then the subject was the title of this illustration. And then the first sentence is, my name is such and such. I am the, I think, like the big guy that works with this game that's called Where's My Water. That's literally just what I saw on my phone. My heart sank. I'm like, that's it. My career is over. Disney is going to destroy me. No, it turns out that he liked the illustration and he wanted to buy a print from me. So what I did was like, listen, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't own any of those characters, so I cannot sell you that illustration in any way whatsoever. So I am going to print one and send it to you for free. You don't have to pay me anything. You cannot pay me anything. Please pass this along. Please tell everybody that I said that. I don't want to get sued. So I sent him like this thing. I think he sent me a postcard back saying, thank you. It's like, okay, awesome. I'm going to go cry now. More European magazines. Their concepts get weird. This was for Architectural Review. A publication I never thought that I was ever going to work for. but it's really cool because I love, and I do have some influences from like Art Nouveau and Destille. And then when they sent me a project, they told me like, oh, it's this architect that works in like Destille, and like he incorporates a lot of like that Art Nouveau and whatnot. And I'm like, yo, that's really cool. This is awesome. So that's what we ended up working on over here. This is for Rolling Stone. I think this was my first project for Rolling Stone. And from here, they keep getting trippier and trippier. And now they essentially call me like every time it gets crazy. This was, I believe, for Christina's Month of Love. Which is actually, that's another thing that I want to address. Like illustrators in general, because of the way that the internet has been working, we help each other a lot. And then like, I love that we kind of use our own platforms to not just like promote ourselves, but to promote our colleagues and our own industry, which is really cool. So Christina Carroll, her name is Christina Carroll. She's an illustrator as well. But she's also worked as an art director, and she has these 2 yearly events called Month of Love and Month of Fear. They're February and October, respectively. So what she does is she curates a group of illustrators, and she's very friendly. So like, if you reach out to her, like it's one of those cases where she's super friendly to go like, yeah, come on in, like just, and then she starts, essentially she has a topic for every week of that month. And then you draw or paint whatever comes to your mind, and she will post it on the Month of Love or Month of Fear forums and website. And I know for a fact that art directors like Irene Gallo and Lauren Panepinto pick out illustrators from that thing. And this is just Christina Carroll, just like, I have a platform and I'm going to share it. And like, it leads me to something that I always say. One of the things that I absolutely love about the illustration industry is that it is competitive in a constructive and helpful manner. We don't compete against each other. We are actually more in a sort of in a team-based kind of thing, where like if Christina gets a job and for a magazine and that specific issue does better because her illustration was really beautiful, the next time, or was very successful at that visual problem solving, the next time they allot a budget, they're going to allot a budget for Christina, but for somebody else as well. Because that first time it worked, it was successful. So like Christina can essentially help me get a job, or help you get a job, because now there's more budget for you. And it just keeps increasing. And that I actually found that out when we like started sort of ping-ponging jobs left and right. Because I remember like this one time where like I got a project and I just didn't have space for it. I didn't have the time. And I'm like, oh, this definitely sounds like, do you guys know Victon Guy? She's world famous. So of course everybody knows her. So I remember thinking like, this is definitely kind of up her alley. Did you try contacting her maybe? Because like, I think she would turn out to, and the art director is like, yeah, she's the one who told me to call you. It's like, oh, whoops. And it was a matter of like, okay, well, let me run through a list of other folks that I can recommend then. And like, it's a matter of like, once I got more into the market, I realized that competitive nature that I was taught from like my childhood, that it's like, you got to get in there and be like aggressive and get yours. Nope. We're not like that. It's more like build relationships, talk to people, like be kind, be respectful, and like be yourself, and like respect and love yourself just as much as you respect and love everybody else. You deserve it just as much from yourself. So, and it's one of those things that like, if this is the one industry that I can make it in, because I cannot be that cutthroat, like gunner. I was never going to be able to do that. So in other words, I would never make it in fashion. That was a read. Anyway, I think that, oh, this was really cool. This was for, what's the name? Guitar World. And when I finished this illustration, I sent it to the art director, and the art director's reply was bitchin'. That's all. Apostrophe after the end. And I'm like, should I send you the high res? And he's like, hell yeah. I'm like, all right. Here's the invoice then too. This is more Rolling Stone. It keeps getting trippier and trippier as time goes by. More Rolling Stone. This was awesome because it's like Rolling Stone calls you to paint the Beatles. Like at this point, you're like, uh-oh. It's like this is not just like small stuff. Like this is the freaking Beatles on Rolling Stone. Like this has to be perfect. Otherwise, legions of people are gonna have my head.
I love that piece so much.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. So it's really cool, like sending this to the art director, and I'm like, is this good enough? Am I safe? And it's funny because the art director actually understood the intentions, and he's like, Lennon needs to look better. He needs to look prettier. And I'm like, you got it. I will do that. This was yes.
Really random question. I really love your color palettes. Do you have like any advice on like how to pick them out and like stick to them in a piece? Because like just beautiful colors in your work.
I love that question. I'm actually gonna do that right now. Then.
Yay.
Let's go ahead and address it. So everything that I'm gonna tell you that I do over here is definitely something that I impose on myself. You don't have to do this. This is just something that a tool that I sort of developed for myself because it works for me. But if it works for you, cool. If not, you can just change it and mix, match, whatever. Teach it forward. I don't mind. It's totally cool. So here's my rules. The first rule that I have is very self-imposed because it's that Puerto Rican influence. I like to use a lot of tertiary tones. And it's just completely out of taste. I'm not going to tell you that it's like, because there is a logical, rational reason. No, it's just because I like it. And I have to like what I do. So when I'm actually setting up colors, I never go for like that perfect red. Are you guys seeing what I'm doing on the screen? Yeah,
yes.
Perfect. I never go for that perfect red. I'm going to go for perhaps like a little bit of a pinkish red over here. Oh my God, this resolution is terrible. This is gonna be better. Go for that pinkish red. Then I'm gonna go for more like an orange red. And then I start picking up colors from like the spectrum. Again, I don't tend to love primaries, so I never pick like a perfect yellow. I tend to go more for like a cheesecake yellow, which tends to be a little bit lighter as well. Greens, I tend to like a little bit more on the desaturated side and a little bit lighter until they start getting colder. Once they start getting colder, I love saturation on that. So here we are. I'm gonna go ahead and finish sort of picking a couple of colors here. Oh, interesting little detail. I have a situation. Well, actually, let me pick another one. So I have a situation over here. I'm not colorblind in any way, but if you were to cover those and ask me what this color over here is, I would have to answer it's either blue or purple. Whereas, like, if you do that, then I can say, oh, okay, this is blue, this is purple, and this is teal.
Gotcha. So you kind of like need the relation.
Yeah, I need the relation. If not, like if I just look at one thing, this happens a lot when you look at Caribbean skies. Caribbean skies tend to be mauve to purples, like they have those tones because of the humidity and the sunlight and the way that it shines over there. But to me, it's all blue. But if you compare it to another picture with an actual blue sky, and I'm like, oh no, that's purple. That I can see it now that's purple. And then let's go for some hot pinks because hot pinks are awesome. So usually when I'm picking out colors, I start with that, which is to say that no, I need to copy this. I tend to choose a lot of tertiaries and secondaries. The next thing that I do is, depending on what I want to do for the illustration, if I want it to be warm or not, I'm going to create an entirely new layer over here just gonna call it overlay, warm. And then I set that illustration down to color. And this illustration, I'm actually going, that layer, I'm actually going to paint with an orange color, and I'm going to do it over that second selection. And notice that, of course, since it colorizes everything on orange, then everything looks orange. So what I do is I take down the opacity of that layer to around 50%.
Oh my gosh, that's so creative.
Thank you. So the other thing that I do is just experiment a little bit with that new overlay. I'm going to go overlay cold, and this time I'm actually going to paint it a little on the blue side. And that's sort of what it does is, I'm going to turn this off. So on the second one, since everything is warm, the warmer tones get even more saturated and more accentuated. That cheesecake yellow has now become like a warmer, pale yellow. But then the blues, the purples, and the cold tones get very desaturated. And sort of I like that interaction that they have. When we actually see the other one, it's the opposite. The warmer tones get desaturated and muted, whereas those blues are just really shining through. And then that way there's a balance to it to like sort of bring out one tone over the other. And essentially what happens is that the warmer tones are no longer like going to be contending with the cold tones. The cold tones are going to come out a lot better, and the warm tones become neutrals, even though they're not like the traditional neutrals, which are like, you know, gray and brown and stuff like that. Same, the opposite happens here. The cold tones become neutrals, actual neutrals at some point, because like I see there's a brown there. But then the warm tones become like really, really saturated. And then the other thing that sometimes I tend to do is, I'm going to copy this again. This last one, instead of it being in color, I'm going to put it in difference. And 100%. And see what happens and what comes up there. This is when I want to get a little extra trippy. And then the last thing that I do sometimes is that overlay, if you go to hue saturation and start changing the hue, you can start essentially getting new palettes each time. Oh, I like that. That might be useful one day. The long story short is there's no wrong way to do it. Just experiment with it as much as you want. Teach it forward. It's just sort of like a, you know how people usually try to teach you how to deal with like the blank canvas syndrome? Well, that can also happen not just when you're drawing, but also when you're selecting color. You can have that blank. So this kind of gets like the creativity sort of flowing, and like at least it gets you like a foot in the door, and like you can start searching some more stuff. And
yeah,
actually,
definitely. Thank
you. And I can show you in this illustration over here, I definitely use the difference thing. Like that illustration, I just went really wild and trippy with the colors. Whereas like in this illustration, it was all about warm tones. There's very few where I'm gonna have like cold tones because I don't tend to operate a lot in them. Or there's not a lot of history before, but that's one where I used to use cold tones. And lately I've been getting a little bit more explorative with like cold tones just because I think I'm going through my blue period. Again, I moved 4 times last year. So yeah, it's like I've been experimenting a lot with more cold tones and stuff like that. Does that answer your question? Does it help?
Oh, for sure. Like I would love to just start playing around with color now that you introduced that idea. I love that. Thank you.
I'm glad to help. The last thing that I impose on myself that is just completely on my work is that I like a lot of high contrast. So, but you have to, when you actually use a lot of high contrast, I do that a lot. Always remember that contrast will call attention. So you have to use it strategically because anything that draws your eye will essentially like place the viewer's attention in that place and in that specific zone. So if that zone is not telling anything about the story or your illustration, then you're not using the contrast right. So normally when I'm, okay, I just finished this one. This was for a Scientific American. So the illustration has a lot of contrast altogether. But it needed to have the most contrast where the story is. So that's why she is sporting a stark black shirt, just matte black, completely. So that way you can actually sort of like visualize it and just it draws your attention to there. Or at least that's my intention. Whether I'm successfully doing it or not, I really hope I am. But sometimes I'm just painting and I'm like, okay, whatever. I just want to paint. One way that I actually, let me see if I can, okay, copy. One little thing that I do to sort of like make sure that there's plenty of contrast, create. Huh. Gee, technology is wonderful sometimes. Okay, you're not working with me today. Sure, I'm gonna open it from over here. Where are you? One little thing that I do when it comes to making sure that the contrast is fine is that once the illustration is finished, or around when I'm actually starting to finish it, I take down all of the saturation. And see what happens there? Like it's funny because like when you're looking at it in color, you're not entirely sure that your eye is picking all of that information up. But once you actually put it in black and white, you realize like the contrast between this tone and this tone. Like it's pretty stark. It's pretty like noticeable. It's just that the color sort of dilutes it. It's like this beautiful noise around it. But the contrast is still there. So yeah, if you want to just ensure that your contrast levels are right and that your highest contrast is where the story is, this is a good tool right there. Just like go back to black and white and see what it looks like.
Yeah, definitely.
And by the way, like nobody's perfect. I'm already seeing mistakes. I probably should have added a little bit more contrast in that face, to be honest. But again, editorial, I had like 1 week to do this. So in the end, with the color, it looks fine. I'm glad that the shirt does the job. Okay, let's go back to this. I'm gonna start going through it a little faster because you guys probably want to ask questions, and I don't want to like keep you too much on all this stuff. This was for Rolling Stone. This is probably one of my favorite pieces that I've ever done. It was really fun and it was really trippy. And the Rolling Stone guys definitely like asked me if I was like tripping on stuff, and I'm like, no, it's like I just think that way. Scientific American. I've done some advertising work, not a lot of it. I don't love the industry, but it does pay well. So sometimes it actually is not a bad idea to take a project here and there. The thing that I'll say is that this is a good example of me saying that when you're a freelancer, it's not a bad idea to actually just have like your hands in a couple of different piggy banks, so that you have different sources of income that come in at different times as well. What you're invoicing today may not come in for like 30 days. So that sort of like balances itself out. I don't love advertising industry, but I do take projects from it. And some of them are actually really fun. Some of them I'm just not fond of. I don't know what it is that I don't resonate with advertising. I think what happens is that I'm so into sci-fi fantasy that the few advertising projects that I do take and that I like have a lot to do with sci-fi fantasy. Evidently. This is super old though. Yeah, I don't even remember what these things are for. Yeah, I did some projects for Range Rover like a long time ago. It was really cool because this reminded me to that one project that I did in school where it's like I was forced to draw something that I wasn't comfortable with. I couldn't draw cars worth a damn. So to do this project, I had to like sit down and like, okay, let's figure this out. So yeah, I got to draw 2 cars. And ever since then, like once you actually add something to your visual glossary, which is like the amount of things that you can draw and visualize and like convey, like it's something that now you can just comfortably deploy whenever you want. So once I started drawing, well, after this project, I actually started incorporating cars whenever I wanted because it was no longer a problem. This was for World Wildlife Fund, which was a little tricky because apparently they got caught doing some bad stuff. So I don't know. That's more World Wildlife Fund. This I put in advertising. To be honest, this is more like this was an album cover. And it's really cool because it was actually printed in like an LP. So like it's like the front and the back. And then they wanted it to be like very eerie and rainbows and whatnot. And I'm like, yeah, you got it. That's totally fine. And it's really cool to work with musicians sometimes. I have had two experiences. Either it went really awesome or it went horrible, absolutely horrible. With these musicians, it was awesome. I've worked with a couple of folks that are more into like the hip hop industry, and they were notoriously bad projects, like really, really bad. The communication was bad, and they were excited about stuff and approved everything, and then you went to final and they were like, this is amazing, and then a month later they're like, we don't like it. It's like, what? This is not how that, what? Like, I have emails that says that you loved it. Well, these folks, it was great though. That was, I think this was like a SCAD thing actually. Oh, I got to do something like, these were supposedly printed really large. This was really cool. And this was for Tor. And they were used for like promoting some books. And I don't remember the titles. Irene Gallo, if you're listening, please, I'm sorry. Just don't watch this. She was the art director for this. I think this was Major League Baseball or ESPN or something. I don't remember what it was. It was one of those two. It was really cool painting these because normally I do a lot of flat colors and stuff like that. And once you have a lot of action in your illustration and a lot of like contrast and a lot of concept, then you can get away with like painting figures that are not as detailed. But then when you're painting portraits, you're painting portraits. Like there's no going around it. You're gonna have to paint a portrait. And especially if you're painting these portraits, you're gonna have to paint them looking really well and really heroic. And it was a little tricky. They provided some like reference pictures for some of them, but this guy in specific was a little tricky because I had to essentially what I did when I was painting him is I had on this screen, like on my left side, I had a million pictures of him, and I'm just like drawing and looking and drawing and looking and then erasing, drawing, erasing. It was almost like modeling a face and just looking at his features. And then the art director was like, wow, that's the one that turned out the best. And I'm like, what? It's the one that I hate the most. This was a poster for Black Dragon Press. And again, occasionally I get really weird with the colors and I just screw it.
I don't think you should have been worried about the colors. That's one of my favorites that you showed so far.
Thank you. Oh yeah, I actually love those colors. It's really cool because sometimes it depends on the client that I'm working with. I know some clients want something a little bit less niche, a little bit more traditional. So I tend to use more a wider gamut of colors where I use like a lot of warms with a lot of cools and stuff like that. But occasionally you get like a client that's more into weird stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I can get pretty weird. Funny enough, though, Rolling Stone being such a big publication, they want me to do like the weird. They're like, go crazy, whatever you want. They're awesome to work with. This was for Adobe, which was really cool. And I use this as an example of like, I remember back in the day, I guess when I was younger and I was in school, I do remember going to school and learning how to draw just one particular type of person, which is essentially what models I was taught to draw. And this is not, I don't want to get too political or anything like this, but like the truth of the matter is that most of my education was learning how to paint like what was considered the norm at the time, which was a light-skinned man. And an athletic light-skinned man. So when I started teaching, I noticed I gave my students and I teach in Atlanta, so there's a lot of Black people here in Atlanta. And so the vast majority of my students are Black students. So I noticed that when I gave them self-portrait projects, they were painting the details of their hair, perhaps their glasses, perhaps whatever earrings or whatever piercings they had, they were showing in the portrait. But it was a, for lack of a better term, Caucasianized version of themselves. And these are students whose features are absolutely beautiful. And I'm like, why are you erasing it? And I thought that they were aware that they were doing that. They're not. They're not aware of it because they were taught how to do that. And then I realized that, wait, I was taught how to do that too, which is not a problem, but like, let's learn how to paint more. Because like, come on, like I was taught not just to paint like an athletic, like light-skinned man. It was like the quintessential line decker light-skinned athletic man. That's what I painted. It's like the line decker man. Google it. It's a thing.
Well, I know like a big thing too is non-Caucasian hair textures and stuff like that are very difficult for like younger artists to draw and paint and stuff like that, because it's not something that we're typically taught or instructed like how to do. Like a lot of us figure it out ourselves.
I actually created my own Photoshop brushes to paint black hair. I am Puerto Rican. It's something that I grew up seeing because in Puerto Rico, I'm Puerto Rican. I'm half white. My dad is Jewish. And like there are some features in me that are very Caribbean. There are some features in me that are not. I don't know. I stopped quantifying it a long time ago. But I grew up seeing a lot of like curly, like tight, curly, beautiful hair. I also grew up seeing a lot of my friends who had tight, beautiful, curly hair trying to straighten it out because Puerto Rico has a lot of internalized racism. So like they wanna straighten their hair and stuff like that. So as I grew up, my friends who did that started becoming more aware of it, and they were like, screw this, I'm tired of doing this. So they started actually embracing more the natural texture of their hair, and just the things that they do is just absolutely beautiful. So it served as an inspiration to like, let's celebrate that beauty. Like I want to do that. So eventually I just started creating my own brushes to actually like, I need to learn how to paint different textures. So also, let's be honest, I've experienced this long enough. When you've been illustrating for, Christina, you probably get me when it comes to this. When you've been doing something for a long time, it gets bored. And you need something new. You need to like expand your horizons. You need to get to know something. We're artists. We're processing. We never feel how feelings. We feel it all. Like we want to experience it. We want to express it. And like if I'm painting like the exact same thing, it becomes formulaic, and then it just becomes boring, and then I don't have that feeling where I want to do it. So this project came in, and then I was told that I just did this by nature. I essentially drew inspiration, as I do, from like my surroundings. I live in Atlanta. It's a very mixed city, so sometimes my characters, unless I get a description of a character looking a specific way, I just paint whatever I felt like painting that time. So when I started drawing these illustrations for Adobe, I just wanted to paint. Actually, this is actually a friend of mine. This was actually inspired by a friend of mine who's a coworker of mine at SCAD, and I love the stuff that she does with her hair. And the reason why this was so inspiring is because when they told me, okay, this is the main illustration for Adobe for like the big introduction to the new tutorials. So we need to incorporate a whole bunch of tools. So this person needs to be like a very polyphacetic artist. And like, I remember thinking like, oh, Elise, she does everything. She does that. She does it all. So, and then I'm like, cool, I'm going to paint Elise then. And then because I sent this, the art director said like, oh, we like the sketches. I sent sketches. They told me like, these are the ones that we have available. You can send sketches for any of them, and then we'll pick one and we'll take one to final, and then that's going to be it. So I sent the sketches, and they're like, oh, we love the amount of variety of people that you have, so let's go ahead and do them all. And they paid me for all. And they paid. It's Adobe. So, and it was really cool because like sometimes you're getting told that it's like, no, if it's not catered to a specific group of people, then it's not going to be a thing. That's bullshit. Do whatever the fuck you want. Jesus, sorry, pardon my French. Like that's it's fine. Like take inspiration from your surroundings and just celebrate. Like this to me, it's like, this is Atlanta. Like, I live here and I love it and it's fun and I wanted to draw the people from around here. And it was an awesome experience, just from beginning to end. Like, you know, I just sent sketches. I think one of the illustrations, oh, it's not here. One of the illustrations, I'm glad they picked it up. It was, what I drew is one character and she had a bunch of different arms. But since these were going to be used worldwide, they were like, it actually alludes to some deities in some of the places that we're actually going to be using these illustrations. And like, they actually are very overzealous over the depiction of those deities. So let's go ahead and change that illustration. So instead of having like a multi-armed person, what I did is I drew more people, and then since there were more people, there could be more arms. So, and they were like, okay, good solution. This was illustration of West 54. This was really fun to work with. It took a long time, but like this, what I love about this illustration is that I had a lot of time to, they gave me the project, and they gave me like 2 or 3 months to do it. So I could just open it and stagger it, and I'm like, I'm going to work on this today, and I'm going to work on this other thing. And yeah, it's a lady holding stars, and she's made of clouds, and I don't know. I got weird there. No, whoop, I did this wrong. These are posters for Playhouse. They did a couple of different plays, and like I did their posters. I think it was 6 posters. These are my 2 favorite out of all of them. It definitely, sometimes you'll see that there's space there. It's the typography is going to go there. I do in my website, sometimes I post them with the typography in it. And for the presentation, I do without. Comics. This is where we enter. Comics and sci-fi fantasy are my current bread and butter. This is literally my first comic cover ever. I'm glad they called me for this project. This is a very unorthodox project, and this just shows how like comics industry has evolved, because a lot of people, when you're trying to break into like comics, you tend to think that it's going to be about superheroes. I have never done a superhero comic cover, like, ever. Unless you count Power Rangers, which I've done a lot of them. And they are sort of superhero, but they're sort of niche as well, to a certain extent. Actually, when I started doing Power Rangers, I didn't know how big they were. I'll get to that story later. But anyway, this was for Next Testament, which is Clive Barker's property. And it was really cool because like Clive Barker's was like sending me notes of like how much he liked the stuff, and it made me feel like $1 million. This is a couple more issues of it. This was Something Man. I forgot the name. I don't know. I was experimenting. The good thing with comics is that the folks that I've worked with in comics allow me to experiment a lot, more so than any other industry. They're perfectly fine with going the unsafe route. So I can break out like different textures or watercolors. You see those stains? Those were actually like done in paper and stuff like that. So a great deal of this sketch was actually done in paper before moved into the computer. That's why this looks a lot more textural than most of my other work. This is Robocop. This is probably my first big name comics. And I love working on this project because, long story short, everyone who worked on this comic ended up becoming really good friends, and now we're still constantly in contact and stuff like that. Because the editor did such a good job of pairing and like grouping everybody together that when we actually opened the comic, you could notice that it's almost as if we had all talked and we had all agreed to do all of this stuff. And it was just the editor choosing everyone very carefully and making sure that everyone communicated visually in a very proper way. That's more Robocop stuff. It was really cool because this got into Side of Illustrators, and I thought I was like a Robocop. I'm gonna send this as a joke, but no one's gonna a Robocop picture hanging on Side of Illustrators. And then when I walk into Side of Illustrators, it's like right in the middle, and I'm like, I'm the guy that's bringing the lowbrow art here. That's more Robocop stuff. Oh, this was Kiss, and I'm gonna go ahead and say this. the art director told me that Gene Simmons saw the covers and that he was really excited and that he loved them. And I was like, I don't care. I don't like Gene Simmons, sorry. And I'm okay with going on record saying that. This was for Sword Quest. Again, I get to experiment a lot with comic covers because they just allow it. They're really fun. I wanted to just do like geometric stuff, and like this is me taking inspiration from tarot cards. Because Sword Quest actually, like the original story, takes inspiration from the tarot cards. And I'm like, okay, so Sword Quest is a video game, and a very, very old one too. So I want to sort of take inspiration from tarot cards, but I want something that's reminiscent of pixelation. So like stark colors, geometry. So that's why I'm like, this is the Fool. This is the Hermit, the Emperor, and the Hierophant. But yeah, I got to experiment a lot with like the geometry and make everything look somewhat like reminiscent of pixelation without it being actually pixelated. Just very geometric. John Wick. I don't know. I can watch that movie in mute. I don't care at all for the story, but it's just so beautifully shot. And then we get to the Power Rangers. I've done like actually last time I counted, it was like over 60 something covers for Power Rangers. And it's really cool when they first called me for this because there was like this unspoken, oh my God, it begins. Okay, just do it. Come here. There was this unspoken rule when it came to the Power Rangers that we didn't want to do Power Rangers as they are. We want to do Power Rangers as we thought they were when we were kids. So it's like we wanted to have like, this is the coolest thing we've ever seen. And then when you go back and you're like, oh my God, this is like, no, we want to return to that cool feeling. And also we want to, there's this like, for a long time, there was this like shaming of like people for liking something. And it's like, stop it. Like everyone likes something. Like I always equate it to like people that will I read, but I also watch TV. And I also love playing video games. And I do have friends that are readers that are like, oh, that person doesn't read. And I'm like, oh, so like, do you judge other people for the way that they consume their media? Who cares? Like, I'm going to be honest here. I don't like movies. I don't watch movies. I watch TV shows, I play video games, and I read. But like, I have been shamed for not liking movies. And I'm like, who cares? I consume other media, whatever. So I do like that the Power Rangers that we were trying to aim for over here was like, let's just take pride in it, whatever. It's fun. It can be really cool. So I done a whole bunch. This is just a very, very like select few Power Ranger covers that I've done for them. And then with them, I get to experiment a lot with like getting very colorful and just getting really wild and a lot of action and whatnot. And I get to experiment a little bit with like those superhero poses, which can be fun sometimes. Oh, this piece has a sweet spot. It was colorized in Photoshop, but it was started with inks and paper. I had a really bad accident where I fell down some stairs and I tore several muscles in my back, and I essentially couldn't move. Like my movement was, I had a brace and everything. It was just really bad. So this was the first piece I finished after that accident because like one of my friends built an extension to my desk so that I could paint standing up because it's like the only thing that I could do. And to this day, like I still love this piece just for that because like it was definitely me fighting my pain, but I'm like, I'm gonna do this shit. I'm gonna do it. It's more Power Rangers, more Power Rangers, even more. And then I did a couple of projects for DC Vertigo. I did Sandman. I did a couple of covers for them. I really like doing this because it was me getting more painterly and drawing less, and which is fun to do every now and then. Once you've actually accumulated certain skills, you kind of want to use them every now and then, because most of the stuff that I do is very flat color. But when I was painting this, I'm like, I want to have some fun and do something a little bit more painterly, and you know, once they saw how different it was, they fired me. Not kidding. This was the last one that I did. This and this are the first two that I did for them, which I still love them, but this was my favorite out of all of them. And this is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. These are 3 separate covers, but if you put them together, they line up. And then fantasy and books. This is like the last section that I have, and it started off a lot with Irene Gallo. So a lot of the first illustrations that you're going to see is the stuff that I did for Tor.com. Some of them are actually very old, so you can see sort of how they evolve. I feel like the best way that I can see how my work has evolved is by seeing the work that I've done for Irene. Because most of the work that I do for Irene, every time I get a project from her, I get an opportunity to try something new, to try something entirely different, and to see how far I can take it. Because Irene is not just welcoming to new illustrators, but very welcoming to you, like, evolving as an artist. I think this was like an Americaverse thing, which I have some reservations about. Oh, I got to draw mermaids, which I kind of wanted to model after betta fishes, because, like, they're really pretty. If anybody has ever had sleep paralysis, yeah, screw that, man. It sucks. Oh, I love this. I loved that the main character hero in the story is this old Latin lady that is, like, really badass, and then that's why I kind of wanted to draw her this way and stuff like that. Also, I got to paint my cat too, so that was fun. Because, like, the story had a cat, and the description fits my cat perfectly. So I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna paint my cat. This is an interpretation of Little Red Riding Hood.
Badass.
Thank you. Oh, remember when I told you that Irene gets me a lot of stories that it's like Puerto Rican people and queer people and stuff like that? This is one of them, actually. I've been doing a lot of those stories with her. And then a couple of these as well that are like Greek gods in modern times. I love doing this illustration. It was weird. It was eerie. And I thought Irene was like, even Irene was going to be like, a little too much. Let's dial it back a little bit. I sent it, and her reply was, just going to say what Greg said. Wow. Because she showed it to Greg, and Greg was really, like, happy about it too. I'm like, oh my God, it made me feel like $1 million. It's one of those validations of, like, you think you're doing something super wrong because it looks so fucking weird. And then someone out there says, like, this is awesome. I'm like, oh my God, that's what I'm hoping all the time. This illustration is kind of funny because this is one of my favorite illustrations that I've ever done ever. And I stand by it, but, like, the reception is like practically non-existent because, like, people don't like it. But I'm like, you know what? I enjoy doing it, and I think that's why I like it. Even when I see it right now, I see the simplicity of it. It's not a big deal. It's a book cover, so there's a lot of space in the middle that, like, was essentially reserved for type and stuff like that. But essentially, like, I liked the process of doing it. I enjoyed every moment of this, like, creating this illustration. So to this day, I still love it, and I'm still going to show it off. I think this was my latest for her. And again, trying things. I just wanted to paint something super eerie and shiny. This was for Lightspeed magazine. It was a really cool story about what if wars were, like, historically wars were waged by women instead of men. It's a very interesting story. I love drawing her. She's just so freaking cool. She's a kickboxer that refuses to use any gloves or anything like that. So I really like drawing her. Oh, and I did a reference shot just for that. And yeah, I totally took a shot while I was doing it. I'm like, yeah, if I'm gonna do a reference shot, I'm gonna do the whole thing. Screw it. Oh, drawing a cowboy over a hippo. Yes. Like, Irene actually sent me an email and she's like, do you want to draw a cowboy over a hippo? And I'm like, do you think I'm gonna say no to this? Yes. It's like, wait 15 minutes. I'm gonna have your sketch. This was a really futuristic. This was definitely up my alley because I love technopunk stuff. And it's really interesting because like my work sometimes doesn't lend itself very well for technopunk stuff, but I definitely consume a lot of technopunk stuff. So yeah, that video game that's coming out soon, I'm totally down for that. But it was really cool to actually draw this illustration and sort of incorporate some of those like technopunk tastes into it. This was for Dungeons and Dragons, which was really cool because essentially what they said is like, oh, we want you to draw from. They said we want you to draw like the quintessential dungeon master. And then the art director said, but we want you to draw from your experiences. And then I sent some sketches and I told her like, listen, like I'm gonna be honest with you, like the times that I've played D&D, my dungeon masters have always been women. And she's like, well, why don't the sketches have women? Just turn that into a woman. And I'm like, okay, cool, awesome. So that's the illustration that came out of it. This was a book cover for a reprint of Joan of Arc by some person I forgot name, whatever. I'm terrible with names. Book cover. This is a front. This is a back. This was a great deal of compromise because they wanted to put more and more shadows on the female character, and it ended up getting too contrasty, which meant like she was getting diluted by the background. They also wanted a lot of green, which I'm like, it's not going to print well. Like this, it ended up really looking cool, but it was a little tricky to finish. I did the series for Artemis Fowl as well, like the books for Artemis Fowl. And these have been just so much fun to paint. Wait, what happened to the other Artemis Fowl's books? Okay, I may have not put them in there. This is for Tor Books. This is actually like, this is not for the website itself. This is like an actual book. I do have it back there somewhere. Oh, here's more Artemis Fowl. I guess I was out of order. But it was really, really cool to paint these. I don't always use reference pictures. By the way, whoever told you that reference pictures are cheating, they're cheating. That's bullshit. Every tool that you can use to enhance your art and make it better is a viable tool. Again, if you use a reference picture, no one's gonna die. It's fine. In fact, like drawing inspiration from reality can actually end up with you like coming up with a lot of new creative like ideas to juxtapose over that will essentially transform that reality into whatever the hell you want. So for these two characters, I didn't use reference pictures, but for this character, I did. And I had my nephew in the house. And I'm like, okay, you need to dress in a tux, which he had. And then you need to put a winter jacket and a huge like scarf. And we need to go outside and have you run like sprinting because I need to take a couple of reference shots. And he's like, okay, when? It's like today because the book comes out in winter. I asked him to do that in the middle of summer in Atlanta. Like it's a miracle he's still alive. He actually a couple of days ago brought it up and it's like, yeah, I remember that time you made do that. And it's like, yeah, well, there's more times. It's not the last time. This is more Artemis Fowl as well. I think this was my favorite of all the covers. Because again, I got to get really trippy and stuff, and it's really fun to do that stuff. And with these, I got to get a little bit more painterly as well, which is always fun, like less flat colors. Again, what I do is like if the character is retrieved and like the important aspect of the illustration is more the action, like the verb, then I don't put that much attention into like fleshing out every little detail of the character as I put attention into like portraying the action. Whereas like if it's a portrait, then I just put more attention into like telling the story by painting the features and stuff like that. There's different ways of telling a story. You can tell a story by showing the verb, or you can tell a story by showing the character. So This is one of those cases where I'm showing the character more than anything. This was really fun. This was for Irene Gallo, and this had something to do with. Sometimes I forget what the projects are about. They overlap sometimes. So like, I dissect what it is, the information I need from the illustration, and then I just go ahead and do it and deliver an invoice. So sometimes I forget the nature of every project. I know this one had something to do with Mad Max, and it was really cool, and the story was really awesome. And the main character was a very tall, like, Black woman. And like, I definitely drew inspiration from a couple of folks. Mainly, if anybody remembers the 90s, supermodel named Alec Weck had some really awesome features, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna draw inspiration from that. And she also had like a shaved head, and she looked amazing. She's one of those supermodels that during the like mid 90s was definitely breaking that stigma of like the perfect. What's her name? It's the lady that's in Rooms to Go now. Some model, whatever. Anyway, this was a really cool illustration because it was a story about a trans person who is forced to dress a specific way, but not allowed to transition. So like, I had to draw a very like sort of genderless figure in the middle and draw attention to the silhouette. What I wanted to do was just draw attention to the silhouette more than anything else. If anybody knows anything about drag, it has a lot to do with silhouette. So I wanted to essentially just focus more on the silhouette and what a silhouette can actually do to the figure and how it can either define it or like blur every definition. This was from Dungeons and Dragons, and it was really, really fun. This is one of those cases where I actually didn't use a reference picture. Normally, when I want to portray a figure that's like really like well-defined and like everything in the right place, then I will use a reference picture, and especially if I want proper lighting. And then if I want to get really creative and just go wild and do whatever I want, it allows me to portray the action better. So sometimes I don't use reference pictures for those. So in this case, I didn't use reference pictures. There is no need to glorify. What I've always disliked is people that glorify not using reference pictures. I don't glorify that. Sometimes I use them, sometimes I don't. Just learn like, what's your comfort zone? What do you use it for? Do you need it? Do you not need it? Do you want it? Perfectly fine. I think this was for Angelarium, which is by Pete Moorbacker. I did a couple of illustrations for that book. And this one too. And I think this might be the last one. Yep, it's the last one. That was the longest presentation. I'm going to have to like clip some of it out because I think I've kept you for too long. I'm sorry.
No, Goñi, that was great. Thank you so much. And you, just so you know, you touched on so many things that I think the students have, have been dealing with, everything from anxiety to talking to people. As simple as that. Like everything you're saying really fits in perfectly. So to hear that from a professional is just amazing. So thank you so much for being so open and for spending time with us today. This is wonderful. So guys, I know that we're well onto 1:30, but if there's any last minute questions, since we have him here, you guys have any questions for him?
Yeah. So you said that you made your own brushes when it came to drawing like black hair and stuff like that. Would you have any advice on like how to approach making your own brushes for that?
Observation. Observation is key. There is an aspect that I also use that I actually derived this from when I was actually developing my first few brushes. When I started my work originally, I didn't paint on the computer. I actually used to ink and draw on paper. And there's like a tactile nature to it. So when I actually started doing almost everything in computer, it took me a while to sort of like develop some brushes that could allow me to translate what I did on paper and put it on the computer. I used that same practice to create those brushes and to because I constantly create new brushes. But I remember that time where I had to do a project, and I'm actually going to bring it up real quick. I had to do a project where I was drawing a, oh my God. Where can I find that? The problem with this project is it hasn't been published yet because it's an ongoing thing, and I don't remember where I put it. I must have something around here where I use those brushes too. Long story short, I was actually I needed to paint not just a. It was two characters. It was a black boy and a black girl. They're siblings. He had very short hair, and she has long, natural, like curly hair around to here or so. And painting her the mass of her hair, like the actual volume of her hair, was actually not difficult. The problem was painting the baby hairs around here. They were actually like, because when I was painting using my usual brush, they were coming out straight, and they didn't communicate with the volume of her hair. So essentially, I had to start Googling and researching like the roots and the baby hairs, and that's actually what led me to come up with entirely new brushes. One of my best friends, she has like very natural. She's very pro. She even has videos on YouTube and stuff like that. She's very pro like natural hair. So essentially, I was like, I'm trying to do this, blah, blah, blah. Do you mind if we talk a little bit? And I mean, we just went out for lunch, and she's like, oh, this is what it looks like in the morning. This is what I do to it. This is a look that I'm trying to aim for. Because essentially, I didn't want to draw a character that looked like, oh, I can grow this hair. I wanted to draw a character that this is my hair, and I'm responsible for styling it. And I like it, and I celebrate it. So that's why I wanted to talk to her about it. I really want to find that illustration. Just please be here somewhere. This is the project. The problem is, okay, so this is the character, this is the boy, but this is for print. So that's not the brush that I use for the actual cover. I'm trying to find the full cover where I actually got to paint his hair. That's not it. This sucks. Maybe I can find it here. Please be this. Please be this. Yes! Let me open this in Photoshop so I can zoom in a little better.
Goñi, is this a secret project?
No, this isn't it. Well, yeah, this is one of them. Actually, this is one of them. This isn't published yet.